Welcome to Ranting and Raving. This is going to be another Saints video, and today we're going to take a look at actually some pretty interesting statistics about last year's defense. So last year's team, obviously the offense was horrible, and the defense was actually really good. And what I thought was interesting was I took a look at how, just from a statistical standpoint, not necessarily results or anything else, how last year's Saints defense compares against the two best defenses of the last decade, the 2012 Seahawks and the 2015 Broncos. And as we're going to get into here in a second, the comparison is actually pretty good. Surprisingly so. Last year's team really was very much an inversion of the 2015 Saints. 2015 Saints, you had a historically good offense and you had a you know historically bad defense. And last year's unit is actually a lot more comparable to that than we thought. So just kind of taking a look at the numbers here. Same number of interceptions as the 2012 Seahawks, more than the Broncos. Fewer forced fumbles than either of those units, but midway between them on sacks, more than the Seahawks, a few less than the Broncos. Quarterback hits, same thing, more than one, less than the other, right in the middle between them. Points per game. The Saints gave up the most points per game of any of these three teams, which makes sense because again these were historically great defenses, but also two points per game. What made the 2015 Broncos so incredible is their offense actually turned the ball over a lot, and they still performed that well. Like that unit was just absurd. Their offense was almost as bad as last year's Saints, almost, but not quite as bad. And they had way more weapons, so they were at least able to be explosive when they needed to be. But the quarterback play was horrific for most of the year. But field position, turnovers, there's a lot of things that can go into affecting points per game, and honestly, one of those things that's going to affect it is relative score. Which we'll get into here a little bit later. But again, yards per game comparable, right in the middle. Turnovers, the other two units both got 36. They got 31. The offense performs a little bit better, puts a few more teams in a little bit more of a position to have to press. You easily could see 3, 4, 5 more turnovers throughout the course of the season. So when you really compare just the numbers between those three units, they are comparable. Now, where they're not comparable is obviously the results. Those two teams won the Super Bowl on the back of those defenses. So, did the Saints in 2021 have a Super Bowl quality defense? Looking at their record, 9-8, and then also looking at these numbers, I'd say unequivocally yes. It's better than I thought it was, to be honest. And that's where the positivity, but also the surprise comes in here. And I think what this really tells us is the Saints front office is looking at these types of numbers, not necessarily this exact comparison, but they're looking at these numbers and they're looking at last year and they're saying, if the offense can just be average, just a reasonable average NFL offense, occasionally explosive, score 24 to 27 points a game on average, especially with the help of the defense, it's a reasonable target. Well, we're going to generally give up probably less than 22, 23 points a game. And the reason why the points per game would go up is if you're up big, you get up in blowouts, you're dominating teams, there's garbage time touchdowns, there's things like that. So your points per game can actually get skewed a little bit. Which is why I'm kind of giving that buffer. But if I'm the front office and I'm taking a look at the defensive side of the ball, well, okay, from the sacks perspective, the tackle for loss, the quarterback's hit perspective, is it reasonable to expect similar performance to last year? Yeah, it's honestly even reasonable to expect it to be slightly better. From a coverage and an interception standpoint, is it reasonable to expect a few more interceptions? Yeah, it is. Especially, you're adding a player like Tyrann. You're probably going to play a lot more, cover two, cover four. They're gonna use their safeties differently than they did last year. Now, last year's defense had to have a player like Marcus Williams. You had to have a great eraser for those big plays, or they never would have been able to perform as well as they did. But with a better offense this year and just having a little bit more versatile unit, you can expect similar impact but coming in a different way. The big question there is obviously how quickly these two new members of the secondary can get caught up to speed, as well as is Marcus May the same player that he used to be, and of course the suspension component. But making those assumptions that those things are relatively in the same pace, in the same place, none of these numbers are things where it's unreasonable to expect the Saints unit to be able to produce something pretty comparable again this next season. And if you add at least an average NFL offense on top of that, that is occasionally explosive, then you really do have a team that's ready to contend. And that's where we're sitting with this. So I thought this was pleasantly surprising. Obviously, we knew the defense was good last year. They shut down Tom Brady. They did some really good things. They carried the Saints to being competitive. They really made the Bills game competitive way longer than it had any right to be before the defense just got tired and the Bills started to blow the game open. And that was really the case throughout the year last year. But if you add a competent offense on top of that, you allow these guys to get a rest, you allow them time to make adjustments and do the things that you would, obviously want them to be able to do and expect them to be able to do on a good team. And I really am not necessarily even I'm floating past cautiously optimistic and towards just optimistic. Now, of course, the big caveat to all this is it has to be an average offense. And in order to be an average offense, they can't go on turnover binges. That's been Jameis's big bugaboo. We talked about that recently here. You can check that video out. But if they can get that under hold, then this is a team that can actually make some noise and really is a team no one is going to want to play.